Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. One recurring theme in Seneca's work on anger that we find first raised in Book 1 and then elaborated in Books 2 and 3 is that we can use time in an intelligent way to try to lessen or hold back or perhaps even stop the anger that we feel or that other people feel. And why is this the case? Why would this be a technique? Well, he's going to give us some idea about this in drawing out a contrast between reason and anger in chapter 18, where he's looking at a lot of different contrasts. So he's going to tell us, this is the relevant one, that reason grants both parties time, tempus, for a hearing, and then seeks an adjournment for its own sake, so that it has time to search out the truth. You notice that time is being used twice there. Why would reason do that? Well, because that's the way that you actually get at the truth. You don't take the very first thing that comes along and then run with it. However, that is what anger does. He says, anger, by contrast, is in a hurry, festinat. It's hastening. It needs to get these things settled and resolved right away, right? And he's going to give you a bunch of other ways in which anger is deficient by comparison to reason. But this is a particularly interesting one. Reason wants to get things settled right now, right? And so if you can actually slow it down, then perhaps you can defuse the anger that's occurring, right? So we see this discussed pretty deep in Book 2, in chapter 29. He says, the great cure, the remedium, and this is a term that he's going to use several different times, the great cure for anger is delay, mora, another term that he's going to use as well. So mora means to hold off, to not do something immediately, to slow things down. He uses an example at one point about the famous general, Fabian, who fights in part by just slowing everything down, by not engaging the enemy. So he goes on and he says, ask anger at the outset not to forgive or overlook, ignoscat, right? So it's not saying, hey, just let it go, but instead, and here's where a kind of trick comes in, deliberate, form a judgment, judicate, look at the two different options or more than that, sift the evidence, and then come to some sort of decision. He says its first assaults, meaning anger's first assaults, do the damage, but if it waits, it will back off. Don't try to uproot it all at once. It will be overcome entirely while you pluck it away bit by bit. So this is, again, that Fabian strategy, right? And so he's going to give you a bunch of examples. Some of the things that give offense are reported to us. We shouldn't quickly believe stories that are told us. A lot of people don't tell us the truth. Some are themselves deceived. Some are trying to get on our good side. Some people want to split up friendships, right? Some people get a kick out of it. They're eager for amusement. And so he says, if you were going to judge a case that didn't have to do with, the thing that you're angry about, but some trifling amount, what would you actually do? You wouldn't consider the matter proved without a witness. The witness would count for nothing without swearing an oath. You would give both sides a chance to argue their case. You'd allow time. Again, we see how important this factor is. You wouldn't hold a single hearing because the truth gleams the more brightly, the more often it's handled. Do you condemn a friend off the cuff, he asked? Do you become angry before you hear his side, before you question him, before he has a chance to know either his accuser or his accusation? And the answer that a lot of people would probably give would be, well, yeah, I do, but that's not good. The point is, if you slow things down by saying, well, we got to get to the bottom of this before I get angry. I mean, I'm reserving the right to get angry. I need to see if there really was some sort of bad action that deserves the kind of response that anger is a desire for. Retaliation, revenge, rectification, however you want to put it, right? So this is a technique that we can use, and we see this coming up again in Book 3, where he says that, he's talking about not seeing everything, not being inquisitive, and then he goes on and he's going to tell us that, no one says to themselves, wait a minute. So, nobody makes themselves wait is really a more literal translation. Nemo say differt. Nobody, you could say, slows themselves down, right? That's not a good thing. Why? Because, again, the greatest remedium for anger is, now he uses a different term here, postponement, dilatio. And, we get the word dilate from that. You can think about how your eyes get dilated when you go to get them checked at the optometrist, right? So they're getting widened. Well, dilatio is a widening of time. So the greatest remedy is to stretch the time out and not make a judgment right away. He says that the initial ardor might slacken, the darkness that overwhelms the mind might pass or be less thick. Not a day, but a single hour will mitigate some of the things that are sending you headlong. Others will completely vanish. So this is on the optimistic side. If you take a bit of time, 10 minutes, an hour, a day, some of the things that you're angry about, you're going to cease being angry about. But even if it doesn't work, he says, worst case scenario, even if this adjournment, avocatio, that you sought doesn't actually have the effect that you want, well, at least something happens, something that is good by not being as bad. He says it will have the appearance of a trial, not a rage. And he says, if you want to know the character of a thing and trust the job to time, no careful discriminations are made in flux. You don't want to be jumping to conclusions and then immediately launching into your anger. He's going to pick this up again towards the end of Book 3, and I think this shows you that in Seneca's view, this is a really important set of points he keeps coming back to. So he is going to talk about, what should we do when somebody first gets angry? He says remedies work in periods of remission. We want to slow things down. And he says people can say, a lot of good your remedy does if it calms anger when it's already stopping. And he says, well, it makes it stop more quickly. And it guards against relapse. So that's something. But what else should we do? He gives you a trick here. And then he's going to talk about lots of tricks. So the trick is somebody's angry and they're like, oh, I should do this thing to them. And you're like, oh, yeah, I think it's terrible what they did. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't do that thing. You should do something even worse, something that takes some time, something that takes some planning. You see where this is going? Something that you can't do right now. Let's think this out, right? So he says, feign anger and then spin out reasons for delays. moras in this case, the plural, right? And he says, make that person's anger postpone its vengeance, differt. Again, we see this differe, the same verb being used. So it's really the same idea here. Make them wait for their vengeance until they can impose a greater maiorem poenam, a greater penalty, right, upon this person. And if you do that, and there's enough of a time delay, they might be inclined to say, oh, wait a second, what was I thinking? That's too big of a penalty. Why are you telling me to do this sort of thing? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to impose a small penalty, or I'm going to let it go. I'm not angry anymore. And Seneca would say, good job. You did it. You tricked them. And he tells it right after that, use every trick to give rage or anger a respite, requiem, a peace, a pause or something like that. Use anything you can. Omni arte. Arte here is translated as trick. You could think of it as device. You could think of it as technique. Anything is fair game, within reason, of course, for slowing anger down and giving it a chance to diffuse, to not do what it is that the angry person wants. And I should point out this, as we come to a close, Seneca does say elsewhere that one reason you really can't rely on anger for the energy that you need to punish wrongdoing and defend the innocent is that it doesn't last. It's unpredictable how long it's actually going to go on for. So it's not as good as practical reason for actually getting things done that need to be done. So you can see that there's a consistent teaching here on Seneca's part about how we might be able to, by using time wisely, stop or at least slow down or perhaps lessen the emotion of anger.